Happy Tuesday, everybody. You're tapped in to your source for fantasy hockey news. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, and it's another special guest episode. And we are excited to have our first time guest on today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And here it is, the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My friends, special episode today. We have a first-time guest, as I alluded to off the top, John Matisz of theScore, national lead writer, longtime friend of the show, even though he is a first-time guest. Excited to have you on today, John. We're going to pick his brain about all the top topics. Make sure you're checking out his work on the Score app and on Twitter. John, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, fellas, no problem. Let's chat.
Let's chat indeed. You know, here on this show, fantasy hockey, betting in Canada, Ontario especially, it's exploding. We need to have our eyes on what's coming up next. Young players, you have a piece out, very good piece about JJ Peterka, a very intriguing young name himself. I need to ask you about some of these young guns you have your eye on. Maybe a player we haven't heard about, maybe we have. Who you got your eye on to really make their mark in the NHL over the next, I don't know, year or two per se?
Well, let's talk about Dmitry Voronkov of the Blue Jackets here. A bit of a deep cut as far as maybe not coming to mind immediately, but based on the eye test, this guy is incredibly smart, very sound positionally, and out of the three Russians that they have there at forward, Chinikov, Marchenko, and Voronkov, I think Voronkov's going to be the best player. He's the least experienced out of those three. Yep. He just came over this year. He's still learning the language. I mean, if you go into the Columbus Blue Jackets dressing room right now, Kirill Marchenko is actually translating for Voronkov. So cool. That gives you kind of a feel for where he's at culturally. So the fact that he's really still trying to settle in, and I believe earlier in the season, he debated going back to Russia.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was off the ice for him. The fact that that's going on and he's still looking like a player that has some serious potential in the NHL, I think that's very promising. And if you're thinking about it from a fantasy perspective, this would probably relate more to keeper leagues, but a guy who you would be probably buying low on right now, but could really pay dividends. I mean, he's a giant human being. He's got some playmaking. He's got some scoring. And like I said, like anyone listening, if you catch a Columbus game, really just pay attention to his positioning and how smart he is as far as just being a step ahead of other players. And, you know, I don't know exactly what he's going to be like as far as offensive production, but if you're in one of those leagues that tracks everything under the sun, I think he will start accumulating. I think he's going to be one of those players.
I like it.
And then my other one, you know, shameless plug and Flip, you already mentioned it.
Yep.
I think JJ Peterka, he's not a star right now. Like that would be exaggerating, but I think he's on a star trajectory. And I think that what's really interesting about him is that he's this like tantalizing blend of speed and puck handling, and he has this excellent wrist shot, and he's got this sort of relentless mentality as far as going to the net.
Yeah.
And a lot of times young players, that becomes a talking point. God, this guy's always on the perimeter. Why won't he get to the hard areas and take a bunch of slot shots, get into the inner slot, etc. Like he's already got that figured out. And his wheels are so intimidating that you know, when I was working on that story, his line mate Jack Quinn mentioned like sometimes it looks like the defenders are having panic attacks. Like like that. It's sort of like, remember that that clip? I think it was Pietrangelo in one of the outdoor games. He was mic'd up.
Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah, he started backpedaling and he, holy whatever.
Yeah.
Like I think Peterka's that kind of player as far as being this attacking force and having these physical tools. So he's one I certainly have my eye on. I mean, I already have him in my fantasy keeper league.
There you go.
So I'm lucky in that sense. But he's already leading the Sabres in a lot of offensive categories, and whether it's under the hood or goals or and part of that is the Tage Thompsons and Jeff Skinners and Alex Tucks of the world are not having great seasons, but it's also credit to him that on a pretty mediocre team, he's standing out night to night.
Yeah, I mean, those are two teams that Flip and I talk about all the time: Columbus Blue Jackets, Buffalo Sabres. We have a longtime listener, avid listener, who always post a comment on our YouTube channel about the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Shout out to Troy.
Yeah, shout out to Troy, because he's letting us know, he's keeping us updated with those 3 Russians and their young roster. And obviously they've dealt with a lot of significant injuries, not just this year, but over the last couple of seasons as well. And, trading Pierre-Luc Dubois, Patrick Laine, and everything that's going on with him. And then again, even Buffalo. I just picked up JJ Peterka the other day. I was talking about him last Monday or this Monday about the waiver targets, and I picked him up. He scored a couple of goals. So those are a lot of young guys that, we've talked about, and we're really looking forward over the next year and a half, next year and 2 to see where they're at in their game. But someone else right now in the league is absolutely killing it. Sam Reinhart of the Florida Panthers has just been special for what he's doing. And, we've already seen a player this season secure the bag for how he's playing this year, and William Nylander absolutely exploding at the start of the season. Sam Reinhart is scoring goals at a pace with Austin Matthews. He's keeping up right now. So, he's obviously over excelling what he's done in his past, even though he's been a great player throughout his career. But what would you expect his next contract to be? Because we just saw William Nylander sign that massive deal, and Reinhart playing in Florida, he's going to be expecting some big money, obviously.
Yeah, if you're the Panthers, you've got in your back pocket the state tax. I guess what do you call it? Perk.
Yeah.
So that can work in Reinhardt's favor too, where let's say he signs for 9.5, whereas elsewhere he would have signed for, I don't know, 10 on the open market. Just throwing some numbers out there.
Yep.
I mean, he gets to stay in Florida. He gets to stay in this place that he's really found a home in, and fantastic weather. They have a really strong roster.
Yes, they do.
So it could end up being win-win as far as him really securing the bag, as we like to say, but also, staying where he wants to stay. Like, the difference between Florida and places like Ontario is drastic. If I recall correctly, when Nylander signed at 11.25, or is he 11.5? Correct me.
I think he's 11.5.
Okay, 11.5. So 11.5. I remember, I forget who it was. It was someone who knows this type of stuff, the accounting.
Yep.
They tweeted that Matthew Tkachuk at his number in Florida is going to take home more than Nylander in Toronto. So that's like a $2 million difference per year. That's wild.
Yeah.
So you got to remember that, like where he is, where Reinhart is. That's going to work to Florida's advantage. And 27.6% shooter right now. That's a wild number.
That's crazy.
And 20 of his goals on the power play.
Yeah.
All of that said, I think what he's doing is fairly legit. Not all of it. Like, let's just say 85% legit or 75% legit. Like, he's such a player's player. I mean, always has a stick on the ice. He always stops at the net. He forechecks hard. He backchecks hard. He's very strong on his skates. Very good stick as far as getting in lanes. Like a coach's dream. Really good shot. Great off the cycle. So, I mean, he's in his prime. So if he were to break out in this major way, it makes sense. It's not like he's a rookie putting up these crazy numbers.
True.
Clearly, a guy like Alexander Barkov is impacting what he's doing here, but there's no denying that he's been massive for Florida. I mean, I just looked it up before we got on. Sam Reinhart's 37 goals account for 23.4% of all Florida's goals. So he's roughly scoring a quarter of their goals this year. So yes, is it lucky? Yes, is it all coming together for him at the right time? Of course, especially in a contract year. But I really do think he's been building towards this throughout his career in Buffalo, and then the last couple of years in Florida, and he's
100%.
really just, it's a perfect storm for him. So the guy, it's tough, right? Because you hate to bring up all the percentages and say this is all mirage. Because I just don't think it is, right? But it's easy to say that contract year, 27% shooter. I think there's some of that, but I don't think it's all that.
And I think there's a lot to be said about the quality of this Florida Panthers team as well. Overall, this is a wagon once again. That run to the cup was not a fluke. Obviously, last year, maybe some people weren't buying into this team, but if you're not, buy into what Vegas is labeling them. They are the third favorite for the Stanley Cup right now, behind the Colorado Avalanche and Edmonton Oilers, currently tied at plus 950. With a team named the Boston Bruins. So I think they are very much alive. And another shout out to probably another guy carrying a big percentage of those goals, my boy Carter Verhaeghe. Shout out to a good Niagara Ice Dog product as well. We're going to continue to pick John's brain right around the break. Trade deadline rapidly approaching. We got to talk to John about it. And of course, his favorite dark horse club to maybe go on a little run to that Stanley Cup. But today's episode, my friends, is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to everyone who's celebrating from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're like us on this show, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite snacks, and placing some super bets. Make sure you're grabbing those wings, snacks, maybe a wobbly pop or two, making bets on the Super Bowl. It doesn't get any better at FanDuel. So many ways to end the season with a W or 2 or maybe 3. Which players score a touchdown in Super Bowl 58? FanDuel has all the best bets, from how many points will be scored, props, and so many more. Maybe what Usher sings about at halftime. We're going to get a little spicy. New customers join today, $200 in your pocket in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get signed up. That's FanDuel/lockedon to get signed up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you go over to YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today. They're here for you 24/7, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. They're here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus the national show. So make sure you go over there and tune in, subscribe to this channel as well. Again, special guest, John Matisz of theScore. Thank you so much for being here. We got a lot more questions to ask you before you head out. Flip, trade deadline. What you want to talk about there?
Well, this is one of those things, John. I know you're probably already cooking up some takes. Trade deadline is sometimes one of those days that doesn't live up to the hype, which is why we're talking about it now, because these trends seem to be happening weeks before the deadline, right? It all comes out the week before, and then we sit here watching TSN or Sportsnet and 2 trades go down. So I need to get ahead of the curve now. I feel like there's a lot of teams in holding patterns. We all know goaltending every year. Shocker, teams are looking for goaltending. I feel like there's a couple of teams maybe holding up some domino effects. I've mentioned maybe Detroit. What clubs are you looking at that you think are going to be the most active come March 14th? Is it something like that?
I think it's March 8th.
There you go. Thank you.
Flip's not too good with the numbers.
Yeah, the numbers aren't my strong suit, John, but that's okay. That's why you're on.
Yeah, we've got you covered here.
Thanks, brother.
The most active. I think there's a potential for Boston to maybe make some noise here. I just feel like they're kind of playing with house money. That sounds like an insult, but you lose Krejci and Bergeron and
for sure,
and Hall and Bertuzzi and Orlov, all these guys off the roster in the summer. Even internally, they had to think, maybe not a huge step back. Maybe they had more faith than we did on the outside, but you had to think with Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha 1-2 at center that they would take, a decent step back. But it hasn't really happened. Obviously, they weren't going to replicate their President's Trophy season. That was a one-off, even if they had kept everyone. But here they are, near the top of the East, if not at the top. And you still wonder a bit about the center depth. I think that Coyle's been more than competent.
Yeah, he's been overachieving a bit. I'd say, but he's been solid.
I think Zach is probably a number 3, so they're still missing that other top 6 center. And I don't know. I just feel like they must internally think that this is a year that they again can't can't screw around with.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I realized I hedged this question, so let me reframe it because
Sure.
it was originally about the players that I think will be on the move. So let me also, now that you've answered my first question, I'll throw you a curveball once again. The 3 players, back to the original question, guys that you think will be on the move, pieces most likely that in your mind will be on the move.
Well, I mean, I think Elias Lindholm is just, there's
Yeah.
going to be a huge frenzy for him. Normally there would be just a player of his caliber being available. And we're just assuming he's available. I guess officially we don't know yet. But you look at Winnipeg, you look at Colorado, 2 teams that are by all means buyers of the deadline. They need second line centers. And this does obviously trace back to Boston there, Flip. So
Yes,
look at this. This is synergy. First time we've ever
Oh.
podcast together, and we've got
Hey.
a shared brain, basically.
And you know what? Seriously, those are the teams that I would have pegged myself because also, let's be honest, the teams that have the capital is one thing, but the teams that are on the cusp of winning, and I think all 3 of those clubs are right there at the top, not even Vegas, just the eye test of who is going to be there in the end. But I also right on the money with the Bruins. They always make a relevant move right ahead of the deadline, all the way back to, I can't even remember when, but it seems like that's one of those squads that does it. So I'm on point here with you 100%.
Well, and I find Winnipeg a really interesting team in that mix that we've mentioned because, one, I think that Lindholm would be excellent in their 2C spot. 2, I wonder what Lindholm would think about it because, you know, there's potential for a sign and trade or whatever, a trade and an extension, because obviously teams who are acquiring him want to know what is he thinking for his UFA this coming summer. So, I mean, maybe he would like to go to Winnipeg, but free agents don't typically sign there. So I guess we'll see. So there's
no comment on that one, but yeah, I hear you.
And then there's just the simple fact that they have cap space, which a lot of contenders don't have. So I just find that very intriguing. It could totally work out in Winnipeg's favor, or it could be a nothing burger, or maybe they acquire him and he's just a rental, and that is what it is. So that's super interesting. I mean, Jake Gensel, I think it's fair to say that if he officially becomes available, you know, Penn's GM Kyle Dubas has basically said, you know, to be determined. And plus they're close enough to the playoffs that it would make sense to maybe keep him. But if he is available, another guy who jumps off the page as far as a game changer at the deadline, a difference maker. And Gensel's pretty tricky to evaluate, not in the sense that he's a flash in the pan, because he by no means is he. I mean, he has a track record of almost a decade now of being a high-end producer, but he has been with Sidney Crosby the vast majority of his career. So it could work out beautifully in another environment on another line. There's no denying that has the hockey IQ, has the skills to do that, but we also just don't know what that looks like because he's been so tied to Crosby. So I find him super interesting, and obviously the market on him would just explode
for sure.
Especially because, I mean, he's making $6 million. Like, obviously that's more than Lindholm. It's not a small amount, but it's also, he's not a $9 million player. When maybe you're getting about $9 million of value.
Good point.
If you really think about what he brings to the table. So those 2 guys really jump off the page. And then if I'm going to throw a defenseman in there, Noah Hannafin would be a really good number 3 defenseman on a contender. So we'll see what happens there.
Might be the best Leaf defenseman if that were to happen, but I see Chris Tanev more as a fit for the Leafs. But we're not going down that angle today, John. Steele, you want to take us to break, and we'll wrap up with John after the break? You take us where you want to go here, brother. Thank you again so much for joining us, John.
No problem.
Yeah, I just got one quick question before we get to break. Obviously, the trade deadline, that's where, buyers, sellers, teams outside of a playoff spot are trying to get a little bit of a boost, hopefully to get into a wild card spot. So that's where I want to head to right now with this question. Teams that are currently outside of a playoff spot, one team or multiple teams, if you have some in mind, who do you think, which team outside of a playoff spot do you think could potentially finish the regular season in a playoff spot and potentially go on a run? For me personally, Flip knows this, I am right there behind the New York Islanders, especially now getting Patrick Waugh behind the bench. I think they do have everything in the making to be a playoff team and go on a run. They've got the goaltending. Noah Dobson's having an absolutely electric season. so far. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of Bo Horvat and Matt Barzal too. So I've got the New York Islanders as a deep threat if they get into the postseason. But who do you got?
I mean, I think the Islanders was a tremendous choice. I'll go with the Devils. They haven't really gotten their crap together all season,
True.
whether it's injuries or their goaltending is what it is.
Poor goaltending.
Yeah.
But their forward group on paper is, I don't know, top 5 in the league as far as dangerous players and finishers and whatnot. I think their blue line on paper looks very good. So I think that they would be the one team where if they end up in the wild card spot, they could do some damage, go on a run to the cup final. And I don't think we'd be that surprised, because even if their goaltending doesn't scare anyone right now, we know how volatile that can be. And you can catch fire for a couple of months. Yeah. And plus, hey, they could add a goalie at the deadline. We don't know. Out west, though, I mean, Arizona's kind of feisty. I think wow. They're organized under their coach there. And Ingram's had a phenomenal year.
That's true.
Their core is really in their prime, whether it's Keller or Schmaltz or some other players. Like, they're by no means am I saying that they would. I think that they would go on a deep run, but could they squeak into
that would be a shock.
Yeah, I see it. I could see it though. There's a lot to like about that team, and obviously the arena thing. But actually, sidebar: have you ever been down there yet, John?
I haven't. No.
Okay. Anyway, just that rattles my cage, because I really do feel there's a lot of, aside from fantasy value, just a lot of really good young pieces with this team. I really like that angle though, and just to take this right off the rails. Plus 25,000 right now for the Arizona Coyotes to win the Stanley Cup. Wow. That might be worth a 25-cent piece. I'm just throwing that out there, Steele. I really like this question. John's got a couple of minutes left here. Maybe we'll squeak in one more question right after the break and let him run.
Yeah, one last question, but just to reel back a little bit for the New Jersey Devils. I agree with that, but they got to make sure Jack Hughes is fully healthy and ready to go, because that's a player that's dealt with a couple of injuries over the last few seasons. We'll get one last question in with John and then finish up with big time bets. But first, this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe, the follow button, and leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us every single day, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Flip, I'll throw it back over to you for the final question with John for this episode.
Super, super quick. Once again, make sure you check out John Matisz on the theScore app and on Twitter. Latest piece from John. Fire one, looking for a unicorn in JJ Peterka. Great article, good read. Make sure you're checking that out. Shout out to John. Last question. Everybody in the fantasy realm likes talking about surprises, disappointments. Obviously, it's key to the success of your squad. I think the surprises have been covered pretty well. Is there a player that you were looking at, fantasy or otherwise, John? It really doesn't matter, I don't think, because disappointments are disappointments, that you were expecting a lot more of this year? I know Jonathan Huberdeau is okay. Everyone thought he'd bounce back, blah, blah, blah. I'm bored about that one. Any other disappointments that you had coming into this year, just not living up to expectations? Teams, players, or otherwise?
Well, this is going to be an odd one just because he's actually going to the All-Star game. But Jake Ottinger has been
good one.
I'd say it's on a curve, right? Like a disappointment for his lofty expectations.
Oh, I hear you.
Like when he got named, I was like, "Is this a misprint?" It's been a bit of a tough season for him. Like Wedgwood's look quite good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but the thing with Jake Ottinger is that like the pedigree's there, the technical side, the mental makeup. Like he is. I wrote about him last year, and it was a lot of like there's no real weakness with this guy because he's got the
Right.
mental part figured out.
Yep.
He's working with his goalie coach, Jeff Reese, and really fine tuning things. And he's, we had that amazing run in the playoffs a couple of years ago against Calgary. And then he was decent last year in the playoffs. Like, if you were to place a Vezina bet on him before this season, I
Right.
think that would have been totally fair.
Yeah.
I thought he was trending towards joining that, top 5 goalie in the league
I agree.
group. But here we are. And
Yep.
like I said, he's at the All-Star game, so he may look like it to people who just tune in every once in a while, that he's having this fantastic season, but he really isn't. So.
Yep. No, I totally agree. I'm loving that disappointment. It's been disappointing for me because I own him in fantasy. Wedgwood is also like on his game, Jake Ottinger. I would say they're the most reliable or one of the most dependable duos in the entire NHL. Scott Wedgwood on a lot of bad teams is probably a starter. I love the Dallas Stars, and maybe, though, not a sidebar, just going to say it. Little bit of rest for Jakey boy might be a little bit of a key for this Dallas Stars team, one that I think is more than good enough to win a cup. Speaking of going on runs, John, thank you so much. Sincerely, we really appreciate it. Hope to have you back on real soon.
Yeah, anytime, guys. It was fun to chat, and best of luck with everything.
Appreciate it.
And thank you so much to John Matisz of theScore coming on for today's episode. First time we'll have to have him back on if you guys really enjoyed it. We'll have to have him back on for sure, 100%, just because fantastic to meet the guy for the first time as well. But also, honestly,
he knows his stuff.
He knows his stuff. Incredible answers there. We're going to wrap up this episode, though, with big time bets. Once again, I am completely dry with the big time bets for today. I'm not betting for over the next week because it's All-Star week and, there's not many games out there. But Flip, you got to flip triple dip, I presume?
Yes, sir. Same game parlay. Only 2 games on the slate. So, we're keeping it tight. This is a quick breakdown. But when you look at the St. Louis Blues over the last number of games, you got to pay attention. And they're at home to a really bad Columbus Blue Jackets team. Points in 7 of their last 10 against Columbus. You can't not help but like this spot at home on the money line. -170 for St. Louis is where I'm headed with my first pick. Second pick, this one's screaming over to me, Steele. And when I dig into the numbers, 7 of the last 8 between these two have gone over the number. So I'm liking the Blues on the money line along with the over 6.5. And give me Braden Shen anytime point to cap this one off. He's got back-to-back OT winners, I believe, Steele. He has points in 5 straight games, including 4 goals and 2 assists. Also a little bit of a weird stat. The St. Louis Blues team, aside from playing really well, 3 straight overtime victories, 4-3 fashion. Very bizarre. Braden Shen getting it done a couple of times, riding with all of these angles in a same game parlay. Blues money line over 6.5, and hit me with Braden Shen anytime point. That's my lock of the night. Really feeling all 3 of those. Tough stretch for wagering this week, so we're keeping it tight, but those are the 3 for tonight.
I knew the Shen anytime point was coming because you were hyping him up the other day, and he's been red hot, so you got to go with the hot hand right now. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, go to YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. They are here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On. So make sure you go over there and subscribe. Subscribe to this channel as well, Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there tonight, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.